Hello, Wisco history students. And as we begin another week of modern world history, we continue to look at the time period between the two great wars, World War I and World War II, 1918 to 1939. And so far as we've looked at this two-decade time period, we've seen some of the great personalities of the 20th century. We saw individuals in the form of Lenin and Stalin who are going to lead the Russian revolutions and eventually build the Soviet Union. We eventually saw an Indian by the name of Mohandas Gandhi who's going to lead a protest, but a nonviolent protest, as he's eventually going to seek independence for India against Great Britain. We eventually went to the Far East and saw in China a civil war between Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong, and eventually the rise of Mao and the Communist Party. And as we now get into the final stages of the interwar time period, we're going to take a look at these two big personalities, and they truly were some of the biggest personalities of the 20th century. In fact, these two individuals may go down as two of the most evil individuals, not only of 20th century history, but of all world history. Certainly you recognize the man on the right, Adolf Hitler, and certainly he gets a lot of attention in the history books, and a lot of people tend to be very fascinated with him and what he's eventually going to do. But we're first of all going to take a look at the man on the right, Benito Mussolini. And in many ways, guys, the ideas of Benito Mussolini are eventually going to be embraced by Adolf Hitler. So to understand Hitler, you need to understand Mussolini. To understand the policies, the ideas, the hatred, the racism of Hitler, you need to understand Benito Mussolini. And when these two individuals eventually joined a partnership, an alliance, it eventually became the basis for World War II, which will be our final event of history. So today, guys, we're going to take a look at the rise and the leadership and the ideas of Benito Mussolini. When it comes to Benito Mussolini, we're going to be taking a look at something called fascism. Certainly, as we looked at the 19th century, we saw a time period of ideologies. We saw nationalism and imperialism and chauvinism and Darwinism and social Darwinism and militarism and capitalism and communism and socialism, and we could go on and on. But we're going to see another ism introduced by this man, Mussolini, and it's going to be called fascism. And the idea of fascism is based upon the symbol that you see on the right. It was a Roman symbol of greatness. Please consider that the Roman Empire is going to be in Italy, and Italy is going to be the country that eventually Mussolini is going to take over. And that symbol that you see on the right there was a Roman symbol of strength, a Roman symbol of power. And that's exactly what Mussolini is going to call for as he eventually assumes control over Italy. He wants to restore Roman greatness, and that's going to be part of the idea that we're going to be looking at here today with the rise of Mussolini. Mussolini, when it comes to his ideas of fascism, and again, please keep in mind that these ideas are very much going to be embraced by Adolf Hitler. In fact, early on, Mussolini was seen as kind of the father figure, the mentor, the professor, with Hitler being the student, the pupil, the son, who's going to eventually learn a lot of these ideas. So let's take a look at what Mussolini believed in and what was the basis for his fascist idea. First of all, Mussolini absolutely hated the idea of democracy. As we know, democracy is government of the people, for the people, by the people. It's a government that we embrace. It's a government that we fought for, a political idea that we fought for when it came to our American Revolution. And it's ultimately something that we embraced throughout all of our history. In fact, as we got involved with World War I, Woodrow Wilson, who eventually sent 2 million doughboys to eventually fight the Great War, said that we need to make the world safe for democracy. Well, Mussolini and Italy absolutely hated democracy. So did Hitler. Why? Hated democracy because they saw democracy as weak and inefficient. Weak and inefficient, that if you put the power of the government in the hands of the people, you can't trust people. And the inefficiency, to a certain extent, there's some truth to that. Because when you put power in the government in the hands of a multitude of people, not everybody's going to agree. There's going to be a lot of political infighting. And even as you consider the United States of today, we have Democrats, we have Republicans, we have liberals, we have conservatives, and we have a lot of different ideas that are out there. And as a result, we don't always efficiently get things done. When you put the power of the government in the hands of one person, well, when something needs to be done, it's taken care of. And so Mussolini looked at the masses and said, if you put the power of the government in the hands of the people, well, the people do not possess these certain traits. They don't possess common sense. I mean, even consider what's going on here today in regards to the coronavirus and how we're trying to handle the coronavirus. And we'd like to think that people have common sense as they go out and interact and go to parks and go to stores. But we also know that there's plenty of people that just don't have common sense. And really, Mussolini believed that people don't have common sense and they don't really do what's for the good of the community. Another thing that Mussolini believed is that the people don't have mature judgment, that really they're inexperienced, they're young, they're immature in their ideas, and there's probably a lot of truth to that. We certainly are an educated people, but there's still a lot of people that are very gullible and fall for a lot of simple ideas, especially when they hear it from either a politician or from the media. And also, he said the masses do not possess what's in the knowledge of what's best for the country. And really, sometimes there is some truth to that, because in a democracy where I get to have a say, where I get to participate, well, then I want my interests to be heard. I want my voice to be summoned, and there tends to be a lot of individualism that comes with a democracy. So there is some truth to what Mussolini believed in here. The reality was, though, is that he's going to call for a dictatorship that's going to completely rule over the people. He also said the government does not exist to serve the people. I mean, let's take a look at the inaugural address of John F. Kennedy, a very famous speech that he gave when he became president, in which he said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country." And for as much as that was a very strong statement in his inaugural address, I think there's a lot of cases today and throughout history where we want government to serve us. And Mussolini is going to point out that that's not the role of government, to serve the people. And in the end, he really felt that democracy really kind of bent the priorities of what's truly best for the country. And also, democracy tends to put a lot of trust and a lot of promotion upon what's called civil liberties and political parties. Civil liberties are basic freedoms, are basic rights. The Bill of Rights, freedom of speech, freedom of press. What is my freedom? My freedom to do this, my freedom to do that. And we tend to, again, get very self-focused. And then also political parties, as we touched on it before, where you have then just a lot of political fighting that happens. And that's where, in the end, he felt that it was a weak and inefficient form of government. If he wasn't in favor of democracy, what was he in favor of? Well, dictatorship. And so was Hitler. But also so was Stalin, and so have other leaders of history. And please keep in mind that dictatorship has been the form of government of many countries throughout history. Pharaohs were dictators. Roman Caesars were dictators. Kings and queens are dictators. We maybe sometimes don't use that term dictator because we tend to think of the likes of, again, a Stalin, a Hitler, a Mussolini. But anytime that you have government in the hands of one person, it is a dictatorship. And Mussolini believed that a dictatorship was necessary and that in the end, dictators came to power because they were just simply stronger. They seized power by force and violence, and often had the means and the ability and the resources to be able to assume power just simply because they were stronger than everybody else. He also believed that dictatorship was strong and efficient. And as I mentioned before, when you need to get something done, instead of having a lot of political parties and having so many people fight and scramble and debate each other, you're having one person make that decision. And especially when you have a strong leader, you can do a lot of great things for a nation. But also when you have a weak leader, it can lead a country and a nation down to ruin. He also believed that dictators are all-knowing, all-wise, and all-competent. And that's why they're in a position of power, because they just simply are superior to everybody else. And that if everybody else had a chance or could figure out a way to get to that position of being the absolute dictator, they would figure it out for themselves. But the reality is that Mussolini is going to set himself up as the father figure. And in the end, he's going to lead his children. And ultimately, he's going to promise his people that he's going to do great things for them and with them. In a quote from Mussolini, he said, "The people are nothing, the state is everything." I mean, can you imagine if the president of the United States went before the nation and said, "The people are nothing, but the country is everything"? In a democracy, we would struggle with that. But in a dictatorship, that does tend to make sense. And so set aside your individual wants and desires and goals and think about the greatness of the nation first and foremost. And in a lot of cases, we don't do that, but dictatorships often tend to focus on that and eventually use a lot of force and propaganda and intimidation to get that done. Another thing that Mussolini did, and it really helped him come to power, is fascism was all about extreme nationalism. In fact, guys, Donald Trump has even been accused of being a fascist because of his extreme nationalism, to make America great again and America first, and some of those phrases and words that we've heard from the Trump presidency. Mussolini certainly exaggerated the accomplishments of Italy. And in a simple way, he's just simply going to say, take a look at the history books. When it comes to world history, they still study us. They study us. They study the greatness of Rome. They study what was the city of Rome that eventually became an empire. And they study Julius Caesar and Caesar Augustus. And they know the architecture and they know the greatness of what we used to be. And we're going to do that once again under my leadership, is how he's eventually going to propose it to the people. He also very much took that extreme nationalism and said, we're going to build an empire. The Roman Empire is still remembered, and an empire that stretched across the Mediterranean Sea from southern Europe to the Middle East to Spain to North Africa. And he's going to tell his people, we're going to build that empire again and become great again. And he also believed that a strong military is and will lead to a strong nation. So really what you got here is nationalism, imperialism, and militarism all wrapped up in the hands of one individual. And he set himself up as the man who's going to lead Italy to greatness through those things. And he's also going to glorify war. Keep in mind, guys, this is the 1920s. Europe, the world, just got done with World War I. Devastated, 4.5 years of war, upwards to 16 million people dead, major parts of Europe lay in ruins, and for as much as America was able to go back to and experience the roaring 20s, Europe was going through a lot of hardship and their economy was struggling and nobody wanted war. Remember, World War I was supposed to be the war to end all wars. But now you've got this Mussolini who's saying we're going to go to war again. And eventually he's going to make that appeal to Hitler, and the two of them together are eventually going to create the basis for an alliance that will set the stage for World War II. But one thing I want you to know for sure, and this is part of the reason why we're not really going to do much about Mussolini and Hitler when they came to power in the 1920s and 30s, is that both Mussolini and Hitler hated Marxism, which means they hated communism. And they hated communism as much as we hated communism. And so to a certain extent, we were hopeful that Mussolini and Hitler would take care of the communist threat that was coming out of Russia and other places of Eastern Europe. And then when they took care of the communist threat, then we would take care of them. That didn't go quite according to plan. And eventually some 50 million people are going to die in World War II. But Mussolini and his fascist ideas absolutely hated communism. He opposed the whole idea of a socialist economy. Because he did believe that there were some people and some businesses that were just purely stronger and smarter and better than other people. And we should take advantage of those strengths. And even if that means certain people, get left behind, that's just kind of the nature of things. He condemned the whole idea of working class unity. Just really didn't believe that, although he promoted a sense of community and believed that the people of Italy should make their nation great again, he believed that, again, smart students and strong athletes and strong men and women are eventually going to be the ones to take and make Italy great, and eventually you have to weed out the weaklings. And he also is going to promote that fascism is going to save the nation from the evils of communism. And there was the beginnings of a communist vote in Italy at this time, as eventually you have the success of the Russian revolutions of 1917 and Eastern Europe starting to look to communism, and you have Italy now in Southern Europe. And as people saw a possible communist rise, and you had business elite and property holders and politicians that did not want to see the communism take hold, whereby then they would have to share their wealth and share their land and have to follow that utopia that comes from Marxism. And Mussolini is going to say to his people, and especially to the rich and to the elite and to the strong, that eventually he's going to weed out communism, and eventually Italy will become great under his leadership. So let's take a look at how the fascists rose to power and how Mussolini rose to power in Italy. First of all, they did it based upon the economic distress. The reason why we took a couple of days to take a look at the Great Depression is because for as much as that was an event that started in America, it did become a global event. And both Mussolini and Hitler, more than anything else, are going to promise their people to restore the economy, to rebuild the factory system, to give people jobs once again. And then came all the other things, the other propaganda, the other ideas that eventually went with this economic progress. And to a people in Italy that were struggling, that was a message that they needed to hear from a strong leader. Italy was experiencing high inflation, meaning that the price of goods had skyrocketed beyond what people could truly afford. They were having to pay heavy taxes to pay for World War I. and that was eventually being placed upon the Italian people. Unemployment was going up, and as people were losing jobs based upon just a struggling economy, this is where Mussolini's going to step in to promise to rebuild that economy, to get the trains moving once again, and to rebuild that factory system. And so often it's the economy that's the basis for a strong leader. The fascists and Mussolini will promise to improve the economy. And as they come to power, they're going to do just that. In many ways, Mussolini is going to fulfill a number of the promises within the country as he had promised as he eventually came to power. Mussolini didn't have to force himself into political power. He won the popular vote. He won the people's support. And then eventually he's going to become a dictator and weed out all of his opponents. They also came to power because of the fear of communism, Marxism, as I mentioned before. That Russian Revolution of 1917, the spirit of it, the ideas of it started to spread to other parts of Europe, including Italy. And people were wondering if maybe communism was the answer, especially when the economic hardship of the 1920s and 30s set in. I mean, there was even a thought in America that maybe communism was the answer because capitalism was failing. And it's going to be the industrialists, the factory owners and the landowners who are going to be the ones to eventually say no to communism, no to Marxism, and are eventually going to give especially their economic support, their money to Mussolini and the fascists that will eventually allow them to come to power. Another factor that's going to play a role in the fascist rise is just going to be an extreme appeal to nationalism. I mentioned this before. Mussolini was a great public speaker. You can kind of even see it here as he just brings a sense of strength and power and conviction even without even hearing him. Well, one of the things that he promised is he's going to restore the Roman Empire. He's going to bring back the glory of Rome into a Italy that was struggling after World War I and trying to compete among the European nations. Oh, that was a message that they absolutely loved to hear. Another issue is that there was a weak Italian government at that time. They had a king by the name of Victor Emmanuel, and he became really the source of many of the problems that existed. And so really, democracy wasn't something that the Italian people had experienced for a long time. And so to have a man by the name of Mussolini, who, yes, set himself up as a dictator, they didn't have a problem with it because he's going to promise to rebuild the economy, restore Roman greatness, and they got very excited by that message. And that's kind of what I'm talking about here as well, kind of a lack of a democratic tradition that existed. So it wasn't like they were giving up their people power to give it to a dictator by the name of Benito Mussolini. And then the leadership of Mussolini is going to play a key role. First of all, he was a very well-organized, smart intellectual. He created his own fascist party. Early on, he was a publisher, a writer within a newspaper. So he wasn't just a meathead who just bullied his way into political office. I mean, he knew how to rally, how to organize, and how eventually to lead the people and to get their support. And in many ways, Hitler is going to embrace a lot of those ideas and tactics. And Hitler himself also will be very shrewd and manipulative in the way that he creates his own party. He organized his own military groups. They were called the Black Shirts. This was especially an appeal to young men, teenage boys, probably starting around the age of 15, 16, through probably their mid-20s, who are looking for a father figure, who are looking for a strong family, who are looking for a brotherhood, for all the same reasons that young men, join gangs and cults and, just organizations to a certain extent. Individuals like Mussolini and Hitler knew how to make an appeal to young men who were looking for something great, and he's going to empower them to help him lead Italy to that greatness. He's eventually going to lead a march on Rome. You read about this the other day, and kind of in the same breath of a Julius Caesar, he kind of set himself up as that role of leading the march on Rome and bringing back. And he compared himself actually to Caesar Augustus, a new Caesar Augustus, who was going to lead them to a Pax Romana, a Roman time period of peace and prosperity. And again, the Italians fell for it, absolutely. And eventually he's going to use a lot of violence against his political opponents. And as he came to power, he's going to weed out his opponents. He's going to use a lot of ruthless tactics. And eventually some of the same tactics that the like of Stalin and Hitler are going to use to eliminate their political opponents will also be seen in the like of Mussolini as well, which is why he goes down as one of the more evil dictators, especially in the 1920s and 30s, and a man that very much was embraced by Hitler. As we wrap up our study of Mussolini, what I'm going to have you do, and I just want to give you a little verbal instruction regarding it, and then I'm going to also give you the directions in the on-campus, is I want you to take your work from last Friday combined with this PowerPoint, and I'm going to ask you to write a campaign speech. We're in this election year of 2020, and although the campaign has been somewhat interrupted by the coronavirus, we certainly know that there's going to be speeches that will eventually be had. And so I'm going to have you write a campaign speech that's going to start with these three words. And you're going to be writing as if you are Benito Mussolini. My fellow Italians. What you need to do is write a 9 to 10 sentence speech. This is a creative writing, so I don't need a topic sentence and thesis statements and some of that more formal writing. So you can just kind of take the ideas and weave it into some sort of a creative speech here. So again, think like a campaign speech, and a campaign speech is meant to simply draw support for your ideas. And so you need to rally the people, and you're going to need to use some powerful imagery, and you're going to have to give them the promises and the goals that come with that. I want it to be written in the first person. Okay, so this is a first person speech. You need to give your promises and goals, and I'm also going to, in the online directions, give you a series of words that you're going to need to weave in there, such as Il Duce and fascism and black shirts and March on Rome, and you'll see some of those, but you're going to have to weave those in as well. Type it, get it into on campus, and in the end, that'll be a nice way for us to kind of wrap up our 2-day study of Mussolini, and we'll see how he's going to have a huge impact, not only in terms of what he did for Italy and eventually setting the stage for the rise of Hitler, but eventually becoming also one of the key leaders of World War II.